Hello, kia ora. Welcome to this NRCoP National Hybrid event on managing change in regulators, the how and the why. For those who I haven't met, my name is Matt Larney. I'm the Compliance Investigations Manager at Brisbane City Council, and I'm your host for today's event. I'd like to begin on behalf of myself and the panel by acknowledging the Jagera and Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of Meanjin, lands on which we gather and meet on today. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Also would like to further extend my respects and acknowledge the Maori as Tangara Wahuma and Treaty of Waitangi partners in NRCoP in Australia and New Zealand, and pay my respects to the Maori in attendance today as well. We're coming to you live from Brisbane. We have a room full of engaged and enthusiastic regulators and ready to hear from our panel. We also have an audience online of over 200 joining us from across the country and New Zealand. Before I introduce our panel, a few points about webinars. Excuse me. All the webinars are recorded and will be made available on the NRCoP YouTube channel. We'll be using the Q&A function in Zoom for our online audience to post questions for our panel. We will have a lot of time at the end for those questions. And if you'd like to look for another question, you can upvote that question. If the live stream cuts out, which isn't going to happen, please stay with us and the NRCoP team will be working in the background to rectify the issue and get the stream back up ASAP. Today, this session is on managing change in regulators, the how and the why. For anyone who was at the national conference, there was a breakout session on this topic, and what we got out of it more than anything was like, it is so important to clearly explain your why. And one of our speakers will be speaking about that today. The how and the why of change is the key to successful change in regulators, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now to our panel, and I'm pleased to introduce to you in speaking order, Scott Hansen, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicine Authority. I think I got it right that time, Scott. And he's been there since July 2024, started a term of 5 years. Very experienced executive, but also a very experienced change manager. Next, we have Kelly Gleeson, who's the ED of Regulation and Operational Support Water Resource Management at the Department of Local Government, Water and Volunteers. Has more than 26 years experience in law enforcement investigations and governing in regulatory fields. And finally, we have Brad Wirth, who's the Executive Director of Industry Development and Southeast Compliance with the Queensland Environmental Regulator. Over 30 years experience across regulatory law enforcement and military operations. And Brad and I actually used to work together at the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. You can find full bios on our website. Scott, I would like to pass to you if you're there online and ready to begin.
Hi, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone.
You must be a bit of a glutton for punishment because you've come back for round 2 of this with me. So thanks for doing that.
Yes. Enjoy the subject so much. So thanks everyone for inviting the opportunity to share some of my insights regarding change with you this afternoon. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm the CEO of the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, APVMA for short. We regulate agricultural and veterinary chemicals to protect the health and safety of people, animals and the environment, and to support our prime industries, our country's biosecurity and international trade for all Australians. We are very familiar with change within the APVMA, and there's a long list of lessons learned that I've been able to tap into in the 18 months I've been in the job here. But also the decade before that, I was the Director General with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and we saw plenty of the changes that you'd normally see across government agencies and across government regulators. Change is one of those things that sparks excitement for some, anxiety for others, and sometimes both anxiety and excitement at the same time for the same people. Well, I'm sure everyone in the room here has been through experiences of change, whether it's a new strategy, a new policy, a new system, a new office, a new branch, a new structure, or a new way of working. Change is continuous and change is constant, and it always challenges us to think differently. One of the things that I've learned over the years is this: the clearer and more compelling the reason for change, the better the outcomes that can be achieved through change. When people understand why change is happening, not just what is changing, but why are we changing and what are we trying to achieve, I find people lean in rather than pull back. They start to see themselves as part of the story and part of the journey of achieving the why, rather than being passengers that are being carried along by the how. And that's what I want to go into in a bit more detail over the next 6 or so minutes that I've got left. So you'll hear throughout the panel today the importance of a clear why. Too often when change is rolled out, it's a list of actions, a list of timelines, deliverables, and we move immediately to the how in the endeavour to create momentum. We often spend an enormous amount of consultation and time in planning how the change will occur, what new structures might look like, what new tools, new processes. But what we tend to skip or undercook is the time that's required up front to get the most important part right, which is the narrative and the story behind the why. What's the purpose of the change? Now, a good example for me on this is the fact that both the agency I lead at the moment and the agency I led before were both subjected to, on the scale of change, the kind of change you'd put into the significant and major category. And that was forced relocations of the whole department or the whole agency from one geographical location to the other. We had New South Wales DPI. We had the unique circumstances of 25 years ago having the department picked up and moved from inner Sydney out to the town of Orange, 3.5 hours west. And all staff were given the choice of either find a job somewhere else in government or make the transition. If I jump forward to APVMA, 2016, 2017, they went through the same relocation from Canberra to Armidale in northern New South Wales. Now, there's a number of significant differences between the two, but the one I want to focus on is the story of the why. When the movement of the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries from inner Sydney to Orange, when it was contemplated, when it was developed, there was a good 1 year's worth of activity in articulating what is trying to be achieved with the move. It wasn't about decentralisation of government. It was actually very clearly articulated that it was about moving those people who have policy responsibilities for agricultural production out to where agricultural production occurs to reconnect them with their stakeholder base. That was the quite clear and quite well articulated at the time rationale for the why. And that became the mantra then for all decision points throughout the course of that relocation. You know, what kind of office did it need to be? Well, they're moving to be able to become closer to their stakeholders, so it needs to be somewhere that the stakeholders can actually have access to and can come in and have meetings with. You know, what kind of structures do we need in this new environment? Again, the answer was always, let's go back to the why, and then we can work out the how best to deliver on that. Now, no one ever sort of, rose-coloured glasses allows people to remember more fondly the sort of pain points of change experiences. But you jump forward 25 years and there'd be no one contemplating it as a smart move to try to undo that move because of how successful it's been and how much impact that's actually had for that department and for the stakeholders and the communities it services as part of that decentralisation. Now, I've got to say, APVMA's move was purely pitched as a moving public servants out of Canberra and moving them out into the regions. Now, that why was far less compelling and didn't answer the vast majority of the questions either staff or their families or stakeholders had about the move. And as such, everything else was rather scattered, piecemeal, and done on the run. And again, because there was no central compass heading that everyone could buy into and go, we get this, we understand why. Instead, there were a lot of people saying, why us? Why not another government department? Why not someone smaller? Why not someone closer? Why Armidale? Like, there was a whole lot of whys that were being substituted into the narrative and the storytelling, as opposed to the why does government want to proceed with this move. Now, there's been upper house inquiries and Senate inquiries looking at all this, so I won't re-prosecute what they found, but it's a good example of how when you get the why right, it actually helps you to be able to, when the purpose is clear, when you get to see what the bigger picture is, then the opportunity and the values from the shift suddenly feel less like an imposition and more like an active choice that you're participating in. Clarity of purpose helps build the trust. It helps connect people with the dots between the work that they're doing and the organisation's direction, the change that's been implemented. And it unlocks motivation, because people aren't just following instructions. They aren't just following the hows that have been mapped out for them. They're actually actively contributing to something meaningful in helping work out how they can assist in developing or delivering against that why as a participant in that change process. So when there's a compelling why and when it's well articulated, I found that something really powerful happens. You start to get leaders naturally emerging up throughout the organisation. It doesn't matter what rank, what level. Now, these aren't people who have been appointed or given a title, but it's because the purpose or the why has given them a real sense of purpose and a confidence. It allows them to understand what is trying to be achieved, what really matters. And so they start looking for additional or better pathways to try to achieve that as part of the change process. Now, I've seen this countless times. We're going through a transformational change here at APVMA at the moment. And it's once we can articulate and once we articulated what it is we're trying to do with regards to improving our process efficiencies, it was like opening a floodgate of our staff coming forward and going, I've been thinking about how we do this. Why don't we try this? These are staff who day in, day out in their jobs look for where there's improvement opportunities. And until they saw that they are able to participate in the actual change agenda, not just by following the hows, but by being an active part in helping us work out what those hows needed to be able to create the why, then they didn't feel before that they had the power or the mandate to raise them. They do now. That's purpose in action. Excuse me. It's the same in communities, businesses. When the purpose is clear and leadership is shared, people raise their challenges. So what's this mean for those of us who have a leadership role? Well, it means first, our responsibility isn't to design a perfect plan. It's actually to communicate the why with clarity and conviction. I'm seeing if my voice can hold out for the last 2 minutes here, Matt. So we've got to be able to work out how to tell the story of change in a way that connects emotionally as well as intellectually. We've got to be able to talk about what is the problem that we're trying to solve with the change. What's the opportunity that it can unlock? And why does it matter now? Importantly, being able to ask every staff member to articulate or think in the first instance for their own individual roles about, if this is why we're changing, what does this mean for your role and your job and how you go about it, as a parallel piece of thinking that occurs as the rest of the organisation join together to think about the collective of all the people that will be involved in the change. If we can answer those questions clearly, we create the conditions to enable others to help us lead. Our role shifts from being the sole drivers of change to being the enablers of change, of being able to set the direction, creating the space, and then trusting our people to help us find the way forward. So as we look to the next series of changes that are coming over the horizon, and change is constant, My takeaways from previous experiences are this: the clearer and more compelling our reason for change, the stronger the engagement with staff and the better the outcomes. When that purpose is well articulated, leadership stops being something we assign and instead becomes something that emerges naturally from everywhere in the organisation. And that's the kind of change that not only lasts, but actually builds momentum so that there is a continual state of change and process enhancement across the organisation. That's the kind of change that people believe in and are prepared to commit this portion of their career, this portion of their and their families' lives to what it is you're trying to achieve. And that's the kind of change that builds not just better outcomes, but better teams and helps us be better leaders along the way. Thanks, Matt. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. As always, eloquent and insightful. I'm always just constantly astounded by the scale of your challenge in that particular change when the why was so intangible. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to now hand over to Kelly Gleeson. Kelly's going to talk to us a little bit more about some psychology matters around change.
I might actually hop up.
Yep, sure.
Because otherwise I think I'll be craning my neck. Hey everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you. I'll wait for the slides. There we go. Great. Now I think I'm in control of these slides. Oh, worked perfectly. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here. I was kind of wondering when I was preparing this how it was actually going to fit in with the rest of the speakers, but after listening to Scott talk so eloquently about the why and how important that is, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have recently finished a neuroscience of leadership course, and that had a very strong change management component, which I thought might be helpful for this audience. And that really does support and feed into Scott's experience of change and how important that why is. So don't ask me too many technical scientific questions about neurotransmitters, please. Are there any neuroscientists in the room? Okay, well, I'll take questions on notice. So 70%, the research shows that 70% of change management initiatives actually don't work. Now, I don't know about you, but that may not come as a surprise to people in the room. So you need to be a really good persuader if you're going to try and persuade people to buy into the change. So some of the factors that feed into that are, look, people are probably worn out. A lot of you heard the term change fatigue. It's because it's a constant. It's every day, it's everywhere, it's in every workplace. So the brain is an energy conserving organ. It takes up disproportionate amount of energy when compared to the rest of the body. And so what it does is it automatically does a risk versus reward calculation when it comes to change, and it will go, is this worth it for me? This is going to take a lot of effort. So it does a balancing sort of evaluation. Another part, which I'll talk to shortly, is the fact that if your brain is in protective mode rather than productive mode, you are much more likely to be in a threat state and much less likely to want to do something that costs you a lot of energy. So that sort of feeds into the whole why thing and why it's so important. So if there is no trust or understanding for the reason for the change, people will resist it. If they're tired, people will revert back to their primal circuits, which is the sort of conversations that we've probably all heard. That's how we've always done it, because they're exhausted. So we have to be mindful of that when we're trying to lead change. And there are also, biologically, there are also several brain regions involved in change, which it makes it really difficult, or it can make it really difficult. But fear not, there are things that we can do as leaders. And incidentally, leadership occurs at all levels. So as something that Scott touched on, the leaders were coming from everywhere. And if you get this trust and the buy-in and you explain the why, I've seen it and it's kind of like magic, and it really, really is effective. So at the risk of harping on it, these are some of the things that we can do, and you need to share the why. People need to understand the purpose of the change. You need to bring them along, but you also need to support them. You need to ask yourself also, have we got the right mix of people, skills and staff and talent to manage this change? If you go in and you're underdone and you don't have the time and you don't have the right people, it's going to impact on the success of the change. A lot of us have seen that as well. So be adaptable. If it's not working, pivot, change, adapt, listen to your staff. If your staff are saying this isn't working, then have a look at what might work. And sort of going hand in glove with that is having a clear roadmap. It might be a project plan, a change implementation plan, making sure that you're really transparent about the milestones, what you're going to deliver, why you're delivering it, and when you're going to deliver it, and be really clear with your communication about that. Over-communicate is better than under-communicating, so that's something that I've learnt. Sometimes I, as a leader, would think that I've messaged something really clearly, and it's been evident that I haven't. So that has been a really big learning for me, to over-communicate if you need to, because people really need to understand what's happening and when. Timing is important too. So you might want to use the analogy of a marathon. If you're going to run the Gold Coast Marathon, you don't go out and just run a marathon for training. You stagger it. You bite off sizable, manageable chunks, and that might be part of your project planning. So make sure that what you're planning in terms of the change is achievable, because people will get really disillusioned as part of the project team if you're not hitting those milestones, if they're not achievable. Also, too much, too fast overloads people. So again, some more things that we can do, and this is supported heavily in the research. Act with integrity. Respect, show trust and welcome diverse viewpoints. Provide time and information to allow people to adjust to the change. Don't rush it and don't force the change on them. Maintain a positive disposition. Engage in emotional regulation. That's actually a really important piece. As a leader, if you walk into a room, and I don't know if some of you might have experienced this, if a leader walks into a room and it's apparent that they've had a really bad day or a really bad morning, that can go through the office or the floor or the meeting really quickly. So it's about being aware of your emotions and how they impact yourself and how they impact other people. There's a term that's really relevant. It's called emotional wake, and it's what's associated with the leader or what's left behind when you might come into a room in a state where you're not regulating your emotions. You've had a really bad morning, you might be late for work, all sorts of things have happened. So it's just that emotional regulation piece that's really important. Trying to maintain high energy, high positivity, and be proactive and outcomes focused, sort of really make things happen. And as a leader, if you are energetic and you make things happen, it's contagious, and people do pick up on that. There was one more. I'm struggling with my eyesight. I'm at a certain age. Take time to evaluate, step back and reflect. And that's that sort of adapt as you go as well and be flexible. This is the last slide, I promise. Hopefully I haven't gone over time. This is just one of the most important things you can do in a workplace, and possibly the most important thing that you can do in terms of a successful change management, along with communicating the why. It's creating a space of psychological safety. So Google's Aristotle project, I can't remember when that was done. Could have been I'd be guessing. But it found that psychological safety is the single largest contributor to productivity and the most important factor present in high-performing organisations. So what is psychological safety? It's where people feel free to be themselves, to speak up and to try new things, where high levels of trust in the team exist, and where people feel free to admit what they don't know and to ask for help. It's okay to make mistakes. We've probably worked in workplaces where people say they're creating this kind of workplace. It's okay to make mistakes, but then you make a mistake and it's not your experience. So this is a really important piece. If you can create a workplace of high levels of psychological safety, your change management processes will come a lot easier. They'll be a lot more effective. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and don't worry, I've been on the phone to all my neuroscientist mates and we've got heaps of questions for you after. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a really important thing, like the psychological safety, and it is one of those things that you hear in places that, oh, it's okay to make a mistake until you actually make one. You don't learn when things are going right. I'd like to ask Brad to speak to us now in a really nice counterpoint from Brad's vast experience. He's going to talk to us about some of the practicalities of the how.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brad Wirth. I'm currently working with the Department of the Environment, Tourism, Science and Innovation, and I'm the Executive Director of Industry Development Southeast Compliance. It's quite a mouthful. I've been working there for almost 5 years. Before that, I worked for quite some time, almost 15 years, with the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. That's where I worked quite a bit with Matt. Believe it or not, Matt was our covert officer back then, going out to pubs and clubs and nightclubs, and he was quite an avid investigator, looking at new skills to try and find issues out there and keep people safe. So that's how Matt and I came to work with one another. But I have worked in a lot of regulation over the years, and I just thought today take the opportunity to talk about some of the hows. Like, we've heard about the why and why that is so important, but what about the how? How can we practically implement some of that stuff? And I thought, just based on my experience, there are three key points that I thought I would talk about today. And in talking about those, like, I'll give you just a quick example in how I apply my methodology at work. I don't have a science degree, but I manage a majority of my staff who have science degrees. We have professional officers within the organisation and they all have science degrees. So it's important we get the language similar. It's very difficult for me, particularly when I first started in environment, to understand the language from those professional officers, but obviously you learn over time. So I adopt that KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, and it goes a long way to ensure we are speaking the same language. So in the how, the first point I wanted to talk about was not reinventing the wheel and relying on your strengths. So sometimes I think we can overthink change and under-deliver. And whilst knowing the why is critical, once you know the why, the how can be executed in any number of ways. So in the military, the mission statement was always read twice, reinforcing its importance, and that was the why. So when I was in the military, the mission statement included the what and the why. So for example, it was to conduct a highly visible patrol from X to Y in order to deter enemy movement along that route. So in executing that, you had some autonomy in the how. So that was about, okay, we wanted to be a highly visible patrol, we wanted to deter enemy movement, so we want to talk to people, we want to display our uniforms, we want to display our weaponry, which is very different to a reconnaissance style patrol. So it does empower a bit of autonomy around the how once you know the why. And that methodology rings true today. We've heard that earlier. So I think problem solving by regulators is a foundational skill. It's a skill that we all have, and it enables us to execute a good plan. So why not rely on our strengths to do that when it comes to change management? So problem solving it drives our evidence-based decision making. It drives our adaptive responses to complex challenges. And we operate in dynamic environments where, evolving legislation, stakeholder expectations, and environmental and social risks demand practical and timely solutions in almost everything that we do. So in problem solving, we identify the root cause, we assess risks, we implement balanced interventions that support compliance, and we foster innovation and improvement with the industries that we regulate. Utilising this style of problem-solving capability that we all have can underpin successful organisational change. So why not apply that style of principle-based problem-solving to your change management processes in the workplace, and utilise that to guide your teams through transitions, improve your systems, maintain trust in the regulatory performance and the organisational performance. So problem solving comes naturally, just adapt that to your organisational change. And the one thing I would do in sharing that with your teams is just exchange a problem statement with an opportunity statement or a purpose statement that helps with the language. Staff don't like to be criticised, none of us do. So it's important we look at opportunities that arise through change and link that back to the purpose and the why in how we deliver the how. So don't reinvent the wheel and rely on your strengths. I think the other thing is about evidence gathering. So we're good at gathering evidence as regulators, particularly our compliance people and our investigators, and we often test our assumptions. So I'll give you an example of where we didn't test our assumptions and we effectively paid the consequences of that through a change management process that didn't go as well as it should have. So I was in the Office of Liquor and Gaming, and it was 2008 where we merged from the Queensland Office of Gaming Regulation with a liquor licensing division to become the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. So immediately there seemed to be some opportunities that we could get in the workforce to bring together some particularly compliance work to ensure that there were efficiencies in the places we were visiting. So anywhere that had a gaming licence, a prerequisite for a gaming licence is a liquor licence. So if you're going to do a gaming inspection, can you check the liquor licence requirements whilst you're there, and vice versa for liquor licensing for those with a gaming offering. So it just seemed that it was an efficient way of doing business. It seemed that it met the public expectation around what an Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulator might do. And it met that industry demand as well, because there were some circumstances early after that merge where officers from the liquor area would go out and do an inspection, and then the very next day, or in a circumstance of the same day, officers turn up to do a gaming inspection where the officers weren't communicating with one another about where they were visiting. So it becomes fairly embarrassing for the organisation, and for industry, they can't seem to see the logic. Why would you have those people come and check that, and those people come and check that from the same office? It just doesn't make sense. So we thought we could combine those to an extent that was, reasonable and practical, and have officers take on some of those tasks. But we didn't fully understand the barriers. So we knew there were industrial award differences, there were varying pay scales and entitlements, there was geography considerations, there were separate office locations that made face-to-face communication a little difficult. This is back in the day before Teams and remote working and that sort of thing, where you did rely on face-to-face communication fairly often sitting in a meeting room. So that seemed like a fairly important barrier at the time. Our evidence wasn't great in what we were proposing to do, and some assumptions that we had around that really weren't tested. So once we pursued the change, we identified issues that we just didn't anticipate. So, and the staff heavily resisted it. So things that arose, and we could have countered that through just good communication and some listening techniques and better consultation with staff. But the things that arose from the liquor staff was bans on gaming. If you're a gaming inspector, you had automatic bans on what you were able to undertake in terms of gaming. The liquor staff didn't want that. Now, there were some assumptions from their perspective as well, as they thought that they couldn't put a bet on the horses on the weekend. That's not the case unless you're at the track, but they didn't know that. So they resisted heavily on the change. They thought that you couldn't, they didn't want to be able to be restricted from casino gambling. Some of those officers had shares in gambling companies that were prohibited for gaming inspectors. But there are ways in which that can be managed that they didn't understand at the time, dug their heels in around the change, but through enhanced communication, we could have avoided that by ironing out those or identifying those issues and then putting in solutions to iron them out, all of which would have had an applicable way to work through. And then on the other side, the casino inspectors, we really underestimated the regulatory capture piece. When we got in and started talking to the staff about the issues that they were raising and the resistance that they were raising, it was very much toward the service delivery deterioration to the casino operator. And then we delved into that further. There were things that we were finding on site that the staff probably shouldn't have been doing anyway, but it was all part of the regulatory capture and how they felt their role was being played out. So for senior management to come in and make some changes to that was a criticism of the way they were doing business and a strike out of the service delivery that was being offered to the casino operator. So there were some real challenges there that we just weren't aware of until we had opened up the argument, and we could have avoided that through just communication in the first place. So some lessons there is consult and listen to that consultation to identify your challenges and test those assumptions. And finally, throughout that process, I think the final thing I wanted to impart with you was to communicate, goes back to that earlier point, and to importantly, to celebrate success. So in my current role, I've managed some change processes with a couple of small teams. There haven't been significant change processes at an organisational level, but for those teams, they've been quite significant. So the things that we did there to ensure success was to have that early engagement with the staff, early engagement with the unions and the union delegates, develop a plan, do it in consultation, share it with the staff, work to the plan, evaluate the plan, share the why, all the things we've been talking about earlier. And one of the things that we did to promote success, we had an operational objective of taking high-end enforcement action where we identified non-compliance and sharing that with community and other areas of industry. So there are so many variables when it comes to a mission statement that demands high-end enforcement action. So we've got variables of getting those matters to court, being successful at court, and then a time frame to get through the court to actually achieve an outcome can be considerable, months or even years. So sometimes that can feel like failure for the team if you haven't achieved any of those because of those variables. So what we're able to do is deliver some objectives that were more measurable around achieving success. So even if we didn't achieve success in court or even get to court, we still had other measurable outcomes for the team, like skill uplift, networking across other areas of the department, increasing the technology that's available to both the departmental officers and the community to have interfaces to various levels of data that they're interested in, and improving those relationships across all of those work areas. So really working outside of our blinkered sort of approach that sometimes occurs with teams. So when we achieved success, we celebrated that. So we celebrated that amongst the team, we celebrated that amongst the broader areas of the department that worked within that, so that everyone got an understanding of the role that they played, because it was beyond just the team in terms of the success that we're able to deliver through that process. And we wanted everyone to know that. We wanted that to be shared across to community as well for this particular project and to industry. So we embarked on other means to get that message across, like media releases and website updates and radio and television interviews and things like that we were able to access, that assisted in sharing a whole heap of key messages for the organisation, but a heap of other little messages as well that were directed back at the success of that team and that change process and how well that had worked. And I just found that maintaining that identity of the team and having the opportunity to embellish that was really important in maintaining that team's high performance and ensuring success of that change process. So communicating and celebrating success, I think, is key to a lot of your change processes as well. All right, thank you. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Brad. And just for the record, some of my finest investigative work was done in the covert in the pub. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. So the next part of our event today is a facilitated fireside chat with some predetermined questions. I got all these questions that were ones that we didn't get time to answer in the national conference breakout session on this topic. So I'll put the first one to the panel now. And Brad, you just touched on regulatory capture, which I think is an issue that's faced in every regulator that I've worked in, certainly, and it was very pronounced at liquor and gaming. Is regulatory capture a reason that regulators struggle with change?
Yeah, Matt, it is an issue for change and one that I identified earlier in my comments. But and I'll go back to that example with liquor and gaming regulation. We just have long-standing ties. We had officers working at the casino on site at the casino. So for a regulatory agency, that has some inherent risks straight away. We'd had officers working in that environment since casinos had commenced in Queensland. So from about the mid-1980s, you'd had staff that had worked very closely in that environment. So that's the environment they know. That's the environment that they've worked in for a long period of time. And without, there was really low attrition rates as well. So without new sets of eyes coming in and having a look at those processes, it's very difficult to understand that you're even captured. So when you're confronted with change, it seemed natural in that environment for officers to be quite resistant to that. And then the impacts that any change might have on their regulated population, they have a connection to that as well, and that's what we found. So we had to overcome that. And one of the first conversations I had in doing a bit of a roadshow amongst the casinos was, all right, today team, I'm here to talk about regulatory capture and the risks with regulatory capture and how we can manage it, so what we already have in place and what else can we put in place. And a hand went up and I went, yep, yes, what's your question? And it was, what is regulatory capture? So the first thing that we had to take it back a step and go, all right, hang on a minute, we can't be talking about the risks of regulatory capture because some of the staff here are potentially more, if someone said it, more thinking it, they don't even know what regulatory capture is. So not only are they captured, they're not aware of any of the risks associated with that. So it is, sometimes it might be, subliminal almost, that it's happening around you without you knowing, but it's certainly a risk and something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Brad. Would any of the panel like to comment any further on that?
Matt, Scott here.
Thanks, Scott.
Look, just following on from what Brad just said, I think, like, without sort of wanting to drum this message in too firmly, if you get the why part right, if you can actually articulate why you're doing something in a way in which you're happy to do it at estimates, happy to do it in front of an inquiry, to happy to do it in front of a journalist, happy to do it, like, if you can really articulate that, it removes so much of that risk of industry capture. And it helps you actually be really clear for your staff about what's the driver for the change. And that then often leads to a journey of discovery as well about, okay, so, if you're implementing a change to your cost recovery policy, why? And that conversation in itself helps flush out a whole lot of both staff and community and stakeholder concerns or issues. So getting to that part where the why is able to be explained in a really open, transparent way, and it makes sense to people, like, it de-risks so much of the move that we need to make. I find in the regulatory world, so much of the challenge around change comes from the fact that we have such a strong capability of people who get given the rules and told what needs to be done. So the why is pre-written for us, and we spend so much of our time and energy translating the why of a piece of legislation into a how, that when we're doing our own change, it's actually the time that we need to step outside of just the how and actually start with the why ourselves. we can't rely on a policy team within our sort of big brother department to assist us with that. It's actually us coming up with what is it we're trying to achieve and then how we're going about it. And that is a different mindset to what many of our really talented leaders take to work every day, which is someone has already described for me why we're doing this, and have left it to me to work out how best to interpret this legislation, and flipping that around and saying, well, let's start with actually why are we wanting to change, what do we need to fix, and getting that right. So I think that's been far more the inhibitor or the restrictor that I've seen.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. Okay, yep, so I think that was just me getting the run along. We'll move along now. That's the 45-minute mark of our event today. So now we'll move on to our online submitted questions from the audience. I just need to quickly grab this laptop. First question is, do you or have you ever used professional change manager organisations in managing your change, or are your line officers effectively able to do this? Has anyone ever used a professional change manager? No? No? We don't need it?
Yeah, so thanks, Matt. We certainly have. Like when we were rolling out a brand new ERP system across 4,000 staff, we realised we weren't going to be able to rely upon our current corporate staff to be able to sort of assist, train, develop, get implemented. And so, part of what we took forward as the cabinet package at that point in time to get the funding for the change was actually a requirement to resource us up with a dedicated change manager and dedicated change management resources. Super users who could go around and train people within the organisation over a period of 6 months and sort of build a capacity that they could step out after 6 months and leave it with us. We wouldn't have got it done without that. We had tried once before and done a poor attempt at rolling out a complete new software package across the 4,000 staff. And so we learned from that and made sure we factored in not just the costs of the actual hardware and software, but the actual costs of the change management resources required into our forward project plans.
Scott, would you say that there's a benefit in having that sort of external lens, people coming in completely fresh to help manage that change?
It all comes down to the size and the scope of the change, and you just got to be realistic about what's currently on the plates of the staff that you've got in front of you. Like all of us have been in organisations, I'm sure, where we'll do this as a side project when we do everything else we're meant to get done during the week. At some stage, we'll turn our attention from what is BAU to this change piece over here that we'd like to fix or would like to do differently. And we all know what happens when we do that is it ends up dragging for years because it never gets the focus and the attention and the sort of... But at the same time, if there are small changes and changes that are only best managed by, especially cultural changes, they're difficult to drive from outside in. They're ones that you've got to get people inside driving. So it's a horses for courses. I wouldn't be afraid to use an outside resource. But my first option is always to think about what internally we might have as capacity and where it is it best led from, whether that's internal or external.
Thanks, Scott. I'll ask the panel another question that's come up from online submission. What do you see as the top 3 challenges regulators face in achieving change management outcomes, and how are you overcoming these challenges? Sorry.
I'll start. I think it's the constant change and that change and the burnout around change. I think everything's fast-paced. If you just think about the thirst for information that everyone has these days, and the cycle of having to get back to in a regulatory space, complainants and industry, all those sorts of queries, the demand is always there for stuff to happen really quickly. So when there's this constant change that's being imposed on us for a whole range of variables, it does feel like there can be a bit of burnout. So I think acknowledging that, and I think it was in Kelly's presentation earlier around being open and transparent and telling the truth around how that's impacting people and how we're managing that as a team or an organisation can assist with that. Just not turning a blind eye to the fact that there is ongoing and constant change.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, I could probably reiterate too. I agree, Brad. It was something similar that I was thinking in terms of that change fatigue. And if we're in government departments, we've probably all been mogged various times. I'm in the Department of Local Government, Water and Volunteers, and the local government element of our department has been mogged multiple times in the last few years. So everyone does have that sense of change fatigue. So it goes back to all those things that we were talking about in terms of bringing people along and acknowledging the fatigue as well. And I think resources and resourcing both FTEs, the staff to have it, and the budget to manage these change management projects is also another major challenge. So how do you overcome that with a lot of research, business planning and very proactive sort of business cases? But you can't always get the money and the FTEs to do the work, but if you can be as proactive as you can and get the right people in the mix, that certainly does help.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Matt, that the one additional piece is, as a regulator, there's nothing in our legislation, and not many regulators have something that allow us to hit stop or pause on the things that we need to do each and every day whilst we change the wheels. The race doesn't stop just because we know we've got to change tyres to suit a change in track conditions. What we've got to do is work out how we make our changes as smooth as a McLaren's pit stop so that you don't lose momentum, you don't lose ground. But that's hard, and that's something that sort of takes a lot of skill and a lot of practice and confidence of your team that something that started is going to be able to be finished quickly. There's nothing more demoralising than when you get halfway through a change process and you need to remind yourself that you're not where you want to be yet, but you're a long way from where you were. And you've got to keep reminding people of the success and the wins that they've made along that path. So to keep energy levels up and keep everyone positive and keep moving towards the end goal.
Thanks, Scott. Look, there's some really great questions here, but I'm pretty sure I've only got time for one more, or Ali might start yelling at me. Cut this out. To what extent has funding limited your ability to respond to change? How did you communicate fiscal restraint with your people?
Yeah, that's a really good question and speaks, I guess, to the point I made just before. I think it's one of a significant constraint. How can you do a change management process if you don't have the right skills and expertise and resources in the room? So I think you have to be creative. And it's about sometimes knowing, obviously, why you're doing it and precisely what you need to deliver by when. Nothing beats a really good detailed project plan, but also nothing beats knowing your staff and what capabilities that might already exist within your establishment. I had a fairly major piece that we had to deliver in my former role, which was the Office of the Health Ombudsman. We didn't have the funding initially to deliver this, but we were just really proactive. We took people offline. We had a really detailed project plan. So it's about that, removing people from their day-to-day so that they can focus on the project or the change management piece that you need to do. It's difficult to do that, but I think it's really important. So I would say it's about dedicating the staff for that particular project so they can really focus on it, and knowing your staff well enough to know who'd be capable of delivering it if you haven't got the resources to outsource.
Anyone else have anything to add to that one?
I might just add to Kelly, like that's really important. And you've got to make sure that when you're taking people offline to be able to execute these changes, that they don't suddenly become known as a person on Special Project Island kind of thing, you know, that they sort of get taken offline whenever there's, because you tend to keep going back to the same people who demonstrate the same capacity to deliver for you. So that's how you build that capacity broader across the teams. But I would just put out there, like one of the things I've learned the hard way is sometimes it's just better to actually say, no, we're not going to attempt, than to try to attempt half funded, half resourced, because the likelihood of a failed endeavour and the reputation risk that comes with that often is far more traumatic than what comes from being upfront about the fact that without these resources, we can't pull this off. So we're going to put it on hold until we get the resources that are available.
That's a good point too, Scott, but that can't be an easy conversation to have sometimes.
No, but I've got to say, like, for all of us, our respective bosses, like frank and fearless advice about what is able to be done with the resources that are available to them. My experience has been, whether it's a minister, a secretary, chair of a board, they all prefer to be told up front that something's not going to be possible with the resources that are available in the timeframes and the way in which they'd like it done, than to be told, yes, it can be done, for them to go out and sort of commit that these things are going to be done, only to find that you don't deliver it.
Good point. Okay, yeah, look, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for those questions. Thank you very much to my panel for being here today. There will be a short evaluation survey in your inbox, so please take a few minutes to feed that in. Enrolments are now open for the Professional Regulator Professional Development Program, which I highly recommend. That's built by members of the NRCoP in collaboration with RegNet ANU. Check out the NSOL website for further details. For our Victorian, Tasmanian, New South Wales-based regulators, there are local and national upcoming events. Details now on the screen, or visit the NRCoP events website for details. Please keep an eye out on our LinkedIn and website pages to keep you up to date on all our events. And thank you very much for joining us, our live webinar today.